Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. This show is brought to you in partnership with the Witherslack Group, experts in special education and care, and John Catt Educational, leading publishers of books, directories, educational guides and magazines specifically aimed at schools in the UK and beyond. Enjoy the podcast.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out! Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading!
This episode of Teachers Talk Radio has been made possible with support from Witherslack Group, the UK's leading provider of SEN education and care. They're here to support you too through an ever-growing offer of free resources, including webinars, podcasts, articles, and events aimed at supporting teaching professionals like you. Visit their website at www.witherslackgroup.co.uk to find out more.
To everybody. The topic is the things we would have said to our teacher selves when we started teaching. And obviously when I put this tweet out, we had lots of responses. I had over 250 responses to the tweet. And a few of them said wouldn't have gone into it, which was don't do it, which was a great start. When sort of 4 or 5 people said that. But we also had lots of people who offered various tips and pieces of advice that they would have shared with their teacher selves. And we're going to run through some of them this evening as we go along. One of the things I also did for tonight is I dug out an article that I wrote in 2017 where I went through some of the things I would have said to myself when I started out as a NQT, or what is now an ECT. So there were 10 of them, or is it 10? Hang on, let me see how many I've written here. 10 things, yes, 10 things. I wrote 10 things I would have said. It'll be interesting to see whether those things are things that I still would say. But let me go through the ones that I kind of put in this list at the time. So this was 5 years ago now. And I started teaching in 2007, so it would be interesting to kind of think, well, would I say the same things now as I did then, and so on. So number 1 was be nice to the caretakers, which, I think that's a good one to start off with, because in my experience, if you aren't nice to the caretakers, then all kind of hell can break loose for you. You get kicked out of rooms. If you do get kicked out of a room, it's hard to get back into a room. If you need things unlocked, like cupboards that contain stationery or other bits of things that you need, and you've no idea what to do, then the caretaker or the site manager is definitely the one who can help you out. If you are disconcertious to, is that even a word? Maybe, I don't know. It's a good word if it isn't one. But if you are not very nice to the site staff, then things can just go a bit slower. And I have seen this happen particularly in the first school that I taught in, where there was 2 or 3 people on the site team, and I got on really well with Barry. Barry was the caretaker. He walks around the site with a massive raft of keys that used to jangle, and you used to hear him from like a mile away. You knew Barry was coming. You knew it. And quite often, because this was near the start of my teaching career, I needed and wanted to stay late. And, he was just really nice. He was like, yeah, I'll come back and lock up. Because I used to teach in a porter cabin. So I wanted to sit in the porter cabin until late and do my work. And he used to come around about 4:30 with his keys. And instead of sort of kicking me out, which he was well entitled to do, he was like, oh, yeah, you just stay there. Because we sort of developed a relationship. And we used to chat. And sort of had a conversation with him whenever I could. And when I left, I bought him a T-shirt. I can't remember what it had on it. It was like a Skull and Crossbones T-shirt, because he was a bit of a metalhead, you know. He used to wear one of those really oversized T-shirts with like Nirvana on the front, and then he'd have this massive keychain. So I just thought, yeah, you know what? I'm going to buy you a death metal T-shirt when I leave this school, which I did. But obviously, it was easy for I'm not going to say a new teacher, but any teacher to be maybe a little bit dismissive, or maybe a little bit disinterested, or even a little bit snobby towards Barry and the team. And that, of course, I don't know, because I didn't talk to them about this, but I wouldn't be surprised if that did happen. It didn't go down particularly well. And, you know, Barry knew who had time for him and who didn't. You know, like, he wasn't stupid. Like, he knew who was nice to him and who wasn't. I mean, he was the site manager. He also, if you wanted to know something, he knew everything. So it's always a good idea, because like he's always like in classrooms, isn't he? The end of the day, when teachers have candid conversations. So he knew everything what was going on in the school. If you needed to know something, you could ask him. He'd tell you, in confidence, of course. So that was my number one: be nice to the caretakers, and I stand by that. I think it's a good one. I'm going to keep that. Number two: teaching isn't a race, so slow down. You might still be doing it in 9 years, or 29 years, or even 49 years. It's true. There are some teachers who are coming up to their 50th year of teaching, which is pretty wild. I agree. And to be fair, it's very, very easy in teaching to burn yourself out by going at 100 miles per hour. And I would have said to myself, as a 21-year-old, or 22-year-old, sorry, because I took a year out, 22-year-old, that I don't have to be perfect at that point. I think all signs point towards you need to be amazing at this job. Like, all signs point towards that when you first start. And that's completely wrong. Like, imagine football. And imagine a player. I mean, I used to teach a lad called Fernando. It was amazing, actually, to yesterday see some clips of him playing. And it was amazing to see him playing. But he's what, 18, going on 19? He's now playing in the C team for Celta Vigo, right? Which is actually an achievement for him to get a professional contract, to be playing in this team. And by the way, Dr. Hiri, I have invited you as a speaker. So on your screen, you should have an invite now. And if you just click accept, I can bring you in. But he's 18. He's playing in the C team. And I would he if you look at like Celta as an example of a football club, Iago Aspas, who's their top player, top striker, has played for Spain, did play for Liverpool for a season, didn't break into the team there, went back to Celta Vigo. I mean, when you look at his career, he didn't really break into the first team until he was like 21, 22. So he'd been playing for 4 years at sort of youth level or under 21 level before he then broke into the first team. And then it took him another number of years then to establish himself in the first team. And he went on to be a top player. With teaching, it's sometimes the case that someone starts as an ECT and then it's like, we're expecting you to perform at the same level as someone who has been doing this job for 20 years. And it's like, hang on a minute. That's just unrealistic. But that, I'm not, and even the year after ECT, or the year after ECT, the first 5 years, like expecting someone to be as good as someone who's done it for 20, 30 years, or to know as much, or to be a subject expert as much, or whatever. You teach curriculum over and over again, then you become better at it. So my second one, I'm going to keep that. Teaching isn't a race, so slow down. You might still be doing it further down the line if you slow down. Of course, if you go too fast, you're going to risk burning out, which is exactly what I did. I mean, I did my first 7-8 years, and I did that flat out. And then by the time I got to like 30, I was like, do you know what? I can't. I thought at that point I was leaving the profession completely. Actually, what it turned out was it would be about 6 months out. And I needed that 6 months at that point because I just literally dedicated my life. I dedicated my 20s to my career, to teaching. I don't necessarily regret that because I got a lot of enjoyment out of it, but it probably led in the end to some sort of burnout. And that's where halfway through the school year, 30 years old, I was like, you know what, sack this off, like I'm out. Then after 2, 3, 4 months out, I was like, oh, do you know what, I'm ready to go back now. And that's when I got a job teaching internationally because I was like, oh, you know what, I'll have a change of scene. And then from that point on, I was like, you know what, my perspective is going to change here. Like, I'm not going to go with the attitude that I went with in my 20s. I mean, partly I didn't want to, partly I didn't have to. I had a certain bank of experience, I could call on that. But also I'd sort of got into a position where I could do the job. I was teaching internationally. There was less pressure there anyway. So it just meant I didn't have to do everything at 100 miles per hour. And I wish I'd had the attitude I had then at 30, at 22, in a way, because it would have saved me a huge amount of stress. But then equally, like, would I have been as successful, in my teaching during that period? Probably not, because I did spend hours and hours planning lessons and hours sort of trying to get better at things. And if I hadn't have dedicated that time, maybe I wouldn't have had the success I did with the students. I don't know. I mean, teaching is a demanding job, full stop. Anyway, I'm sticking that in the keep. Teaching isn't a race. Number 3, using abbreviations for everything is not cool. Yeah, I'm going to keep that. I've listed some here. I've got PPA, SEN, AFL, KPI, SDP, SER. God, I could list loads more now. There's probably about 100 I could list. And it's like, I think what I was getting at was like, well, I've written here, please, you don't work for the FBI or NASA. You teach in a rural school in North Wales, but you're like running around going, hey, get the SER for the NDPs and all this. It's like, just speak English for a bit, So yeah, I'll keep that. Using abbreviations for everything is not cool. Keeping. Number 4, that teacher over there who's taught for 30 years is better than you, end of. Do you know what? I don't know I do know what I was trying to say there. Like, if you're just joining us, I wrote this article in 2017. We're now in 2022. I wrote it in Feb 17. And I've put here, that teacher over there that's taught for 30 years is better than you, end off. I would say I know what I was trying to say there. I was talking about people who act like they don't need that sort of, they don't need that experience, or that experience isn't maybe valuable to them. And that can be quite a naive point of view to take, because it can appear like everything is hunky-dory. It can appear as though you're doing really, really well when you start teaching. Oh, you know what? I've gone through. Oh, hello, Gary. Welcome. Gary King's here. What a great guy. We've got Mrs. Turner. Hello, Mrs. Turner. I'm going to invite all of you people because I want to hear what you've got to say. No one's speaking right now to me, so call in. Tell me what you think. So yeah, number 4 that I've put on my list of things I would have said to myself as an NQT was the teacher over there who's taught for 30 years is better than you, end of. Like I said, I might adjust that slightly to respect experience. Not that I didn't, but I think when I started at 22, 23, and I was doing really, really well, or I considered that I was doing well, and I was being told I was doing well, it's very easy to think, oh, you know what? Like, if I'm doing well now, then sort of that I wouldn't call it arrogance, but it is easy to get arrogant. It's easy to go, oh, you know what, I'm made for this. Like I'm teaching brilliant lessons. I'm doing really well, but ultimately, like, no, because over time you realize, hang on a minute, that teacher has jumped through 100 hoops. They may look less jazz hands than you. They may look less energetic, maybe, than you. They may have maybe a slightly miserable disposition in the corridors compared to you as a bushy-tailed young'un. But ultimately, they've done 30 years, so they know they've jumped through more hoops than you can imagine. They've built a bank of experience, and actually they're looking around going, I've seen this all before. Not in a nasty way, not in even a negative way, but they're very settled in their practice. They understand what they're doing, and they don't need to do the things that you as a new teacher are doing. And that was me. I was 22, 23, and I was sort of going, oh, you know what I'm doing? This is great. This is great. And I remember having meetings, and I got a TLR, like a middle leadership role, quite early in my career. I got one after 2 years, which nowadays seems bloody late. Like, what were you doing for 2 years, Tom? Like, you should have been a head teacher in 2 years. But back then, to have any sort of middle leadership role after 2 years, that was quite a big deal. And yet I was in meetings with like 15, 16 people who, many of whom were much more experienced than me. And perhaps I could have, don't get me wrong, I've always been a respectful person. I'm not saying I disrespected anyone, but I'm just saying my mentality looking back now was maybe not one where I was fully appreciating the experience level those people had and what they'd been through to get to where they were. And later on, I would fully understand that. Sort of 10 years in, you sort of go, hang on a minute. Like, those guys are 30 years in, 35 years in. And then you're like, yeah, I'm starting to get an inkling now of what you've been through to get to where you are and to get into the position that you're in. I'm starting to understand what you've had to do to achieve term after term, year after year of being successful in the classroom. So what would I have said to me at 22? I'd have said, you can't understand what you don't know, Tom. You don't know what those teachers have had to go through to be in the position they're in. And it may appear that, that they're not as flashy as maybe some of the other teachers in the school, but they are doing things that they know has worked for them. And it is working because the kids respect those teachers hugely. And yeah, so that's what I would have said to me. Just you can't know what you don't know, and respect that experience. Number 5 on my, so I'm going to keep that. Number 5 on my list, stop for lunch. The fact I was even writing that in 2017 as something I would have told myself, stop for lunch. The number of times when I was 22, 23, 24, 25, in fact, I think I even got worse as I went through my 20s, because I moved from one school to another school where the workload was just insane. And literally it was a 5-minute, 10-minute scoffer sandwich jobby every day, more or less every day. And that's no way to live. And the stress that I experienced. Now, this article I've written here saying stop for lunch. I agree, Tom. Yes, you should stop for lunch. But then I do sort of understand my NQT ECT self saying, if I stop for lunch, I'm going to lose pace with what I want to do. So, for example, early in my career, at lunchtime, I would set up my classroom for period, 5, 6 or whatever it was. I would want everything set. I would get the slides on. I would get all the resources laid out. I would get my sort of register set up. I would, think about those lessons. And that's not because I hadn't got an idea of what I was doing. I probably did, but I just sort of was overly maybe meticulous. And it was over the top because actually I could have done those lessons without doing that, and I could have had a proper lunch. I mean, maybe I needed someone to tell me at that time, you know what, like you need to have a proper lunch. Like you need to. I remember actually, my head of department said you should go up to the staff room to chat with people at lunch. I remember him saying that to me, and I was like, yeah, I'll do that. I never did. Don't get me wrong. It's not because I didn't want to. I just I preferred to feel less stressed by getting everything sorted. What that did mean though was that from 8 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock at night, I didn't really see many other adults, unless, of course, I saw them on my break duty. I saw them maybe on lunch duty or whatever. And we had like Friday football, so there was some social time there. But through the week, like I just sort of got my head down and I got in my room, I closed the door. And, that's a shame in a way. Like it is. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I don't regret it in the sense I think it helped me to do a better job as a teacher, but equally it probably was, to not have lunch and to not sort of just have a more normal existence. I don't think that's good for anyone really. So I'm going to keep stop for lunch, Tom, and that is what I would have said to myself at the start of my career. I mean, I guess if you'd have said this before I started teacher training, Tom, make sure you stop for lunch, I'd have probably been like, what are you talking about? There's a lunch break. Of course I'm going to have lunch. Even in like teacher practice during PGCE, like you still had time for lunch because quite often you'd have maybe one or two more frees than a standard classroom teacher did. Whereas as soon as I got into NQT onwards, there was just no time to do anything. I was just like, I was just working the whole time. And then, of course, what tended to happen was, A, I'd be starving by sort of 4:35, and B, I'd be knackered because I had not stopped at all during that day. Number 6, asking for help isn't a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength. Oh, yes, I'm keeping this one. And I 100% believe that, because in those first few years of my career, I did not really want to let my guard down and ask for support or help, or even like voice a complaint. And I don't mean like a major complaint. I just mean like, oh, this could be better, or that could be better, or why don't we do this? I was very sort of subservient to whatever the residing culture or decisions were. Fortunately, my first school was a good school. I was there for 5 years. I enjoyed it. The staff were good. It was a good atmosphere. I expected to fight it out in my 20s. So I expected, when I entered my teaching career there, I expected I was going to fight it out with behavior. I think, and that's what I did. It took a few years to sort of establish myself in that school, but it was a good school. But equally, there were things in that school where if I'd have probably been a bit braver and a little bit more experienced, I would have actually said, "Oh, I don't think this is a good idea. This new marking policy, or this new sticker to put on work, or this new whatever stamp. It's not a good." And maybe being a bit braver, maybe that's one of the things I'd have said to myself. Look, be a little bit more brave. Actually say in meetings, like, I don't know if this will work, or whatever. And also ask for help as well. Like, the number of times where I probably didn't know something, and because of sort of fear of failure, or maybe fear of looking like an idiot, or fear that someone had already explained this information and I hadn't heard it the first time, I didn't ask, or I didn't ask for clarity. And also, when I was feeling awful, I didn't tell people I was feeling awful. 2010, I went through a really, really bad sort of breakup. And during that time, I was so down. And apart from saying, oh, yeah, my girlfriend split up with me, apart from that, I didn't really say, and I feel like death warmed up. every day. I didn't say that until, I sort of had to. And even then, it wasn't a full hit. It was sort of a watered down version of what it was. And yeah, I feel like looking back, I definitely should have been much more open, asked for help, asked for support, asked what the best thing to do was. And there were great people there who would have been really, really good with me. But it was on me. I didn't open up and I didn't ask for help and I didn't. Maybe I thought that would be a sign of weakness. I probably did. Looking back now, I'd have said, listen, you got to keep an open channel with people, particularly people that you do trust and are good. Like those people I was working with, I'd been there for what, 2-3 years at that point. I knew they were good people. I knew that they had my best interests at heart. So if I'd have sort of opened up to them and been a bit more forthcoming with different things, they would have been supportive and stuff like that. And certainly it wouldn't have been like, there would have been no sort of way of, you're letting the team down or whatever by doing that. So that's something I think I'm going to keep that. Asking for help isn't a sign of weakness, but a strength. Dr. Hiri is here. Unmute yourself, bottom left.
Hi, Tom. How are you?
Good evening. How are you?
Yeah, enjoying listening to you, but kind of quite stressful trying to work out how to get in. But anyway, I'm here now, so apologies.
Do you want me to finish my list?
Yeah, why not? Because I'm enjoying it. So.
All right. So, well, you can kind of chip in and tell me what you think. I mean, do any of these resonate with you so far? The ones I've been through.
Well, I think there's some real pearls of wisdom there. There's keeping on good terms with the site manager. I mean, that's something that didn't occur to me first of all, but as soon as you said it, I thought that's really good advice because it's not just the site manager; it's all those people who do those vital jobs around school. In the admin team, the person who cleans your classroom. You need them on your side, don't you? Yeah. That's great advice. But
I mean, it's difficult though. Like when you start out, like sort of with me, I was terrible at this in certain respects. Like I was always respectful to people, but I'll be honest, there were times where I was tunnel vision. I didn't want to stop for even 5 minutes to talk to someone that I didn't feel I needed or had to speak to, simply because I was like, tunnel vision. This is what I have to get done so I can leave in 20 minutes and then do this for tomorrow. Do you know what I mean? I was terrible at that.
Well, I suppose that's the whole point of view of the question, really, isn't it? You don't know what you don't know. You start off, you're focused on one thing. You've had some training, you've had a little bit of experience, but schools are such complex places, and to understand that, I think you need a bit of experience. You can't know that. You need a bit of experience for that to kind of fall into place. So these are the things that actually looking back in it, but that's great advice. And there's a lot of things like that.
Yeah, there's loads of things that sort of come back to you and you go, blimey heck, like I could have done that different. I'm going to ask you, so you better be ready because I'm asking you in a bit what your things would be. So number 7 out of 10 for me was turning up for a lesson is half the battle won, which I completely stand by, and I'm keeping that in my pile of things that I would say to myself, because actually, if you go through a day and you sort of go, you know what, I did like a 4 out of 10 lesson, a 7 out of 10 lesson, a 6 out of 10 lesson, a 2 out of 10 lesson, and a 10 out of 10 lesson, flipping out, that's a good day. And do you know what? Like, that's well done. Do you know what I mean? Like, instead of, let's spend like 3 hours feeling down because of the 2 out of 10 lesson, which I did a million times. Like a million times. There must have been 100, like, thousands of times where I went home and I was like, that was just that didn't go the way I wanted it to go. And in fact, looking back now, it was a good lesson. It was solid. It had some issues in it, but it wasn't like, blimey heck, it wasn't a write-off. And then I'd spend like, it'd take me a good few hours, maybe the whole evening, to feel normal again because of what had happened in the day. Whereas actually, realistically, actually rating your lessons and going through all of them collectively, instead of just looking at one that you didn't feel was up to scratch, look at the collective. And that would be sort of what I would say to myself is look at your 5 or 6 lessons, think about how they're all going. I wanted every class to be good. I wanted every class to be sorted. That was unrealistic. It's unrealistic to think every single class you teach is going to be at the same level as each other. Unless you got a cushy deal anyway, and every class is like amazing and full of like, the whatever. But that's sort of where I was coming from.
Yeah, I mean, lessons are just individual lessons are just part of a much bigger picture, aren't they? And I think you made some kind of football analogies before. Is to think that every pass has to be perfect for a game to be going well. The individual lessons are just part of the big thing. And if you know that your students are doing well from the start of the time you have them to the finishing point that you have them, then that's the most important thing. And you're never going to have that consistency. And not only would you not have that consistency, neither will they. So, as a teacher, you'll have things that go really well, things that don't go so well. But even if things are going really well, you need that individual student. They may not be in the right place for that lesson to fall perfectly. So as long as these things work overall, I always think, often I quote Michael Fullan, who said, the aim of school improvement, I might be misquoting here slightly, but it basically said the aim of school improvement is that more good things happen and fewer bad things happen. And I think that's a really good way of looking at it, because it doesn't mean that everything you plan and has to happen in the way that you plan it, has to have the result that you do. As long as, broadly speaking, you're moving in the right direction, then that's the most important thing over time.
Spot on. Number 8 for me was observation grades don't mean as much as you think they do. Now, to be fair, like I wrote this article in 2017, right? And I'd say in the last 5 to 6 years, one-off graded lesson observations have become less and less and less and less.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, but I did put a huge amount of weight on sort of a lesson observation grade at the start of my career, and I think some of that came out of my PGCE, when of course, that was almost like you pass or fail. If you didn't get a certain number of goods or outstandings in lesson observations, like, that was your sort of benchmark, on the PGCE, to sort of say, okay, are you any good at this or not? So I think I just took that into my NQT year and beyond that. And those sort of observations did continue after that, graded one-off lesson observations, not in a nasty way. The school where, I was observed by some really good people. I got a lot of good sort of feedback that I could use and whatever. But oh, do you know what I was going to do then? I was going to throw in one of them like humble brag comments, but like every single one was outstanding. So, like it didn't matter in the end. Like, I did loads. I didn't care, but I still got outstanding in every lesson. But honestly though, like I did put too much weight in on those. Like I did. Mm-hmm. Did you have those at the start of your career?
Well, I often say this to people, and as young teachers they can't quite believe this, but I started teaching in 1988. That's how long ago. So 34 and a half years ago. And at that time, I had someone visit me in my PGCE year, from the local authority, just to kind of check I was all right. No one. The first first graded lesson observation I had was 7 years later, in my 7th year of teaching, and it was from Ofsted. And at that time, Ofsted came in and did a week in school. So I hadn't had a single graded observation since then, until that point, in the first 7 years.
I mean, my dad
took over, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, my dad's retired now, and he retired in 2008, maybe something like that. And he started teaching in like the 70s. Mm-hmm. And he said that I remember him saying that he never had anyone even like come into his classroom for the first like decade he was teaching. Like no one, unless literally there had been children screaming all day, no one would have known the wiser what was going on. And even when I was in school, so like as a kid, I mean, in the 90s, I don't remember an observer ever being in a lesson.
No, when I started teaching, I started in primary and then eventually moved to secondary sort of later on in my career. But I started in primary, started teaching big primary school in London, in Tottenham. And when I was taking year 6, 30 in the class, never a teaching assistant anywhere around. And we had a great time and I got on really well with them. But I shudder now when I think about it. When I look, and especially when I look at these amazing teachers that we have now, who plan these incredible lessons, because we busked it all the way through, and everything. And I worked out that when you brought your class over to assembly, you had to make sure they came in quietly and sat well in assembly, because that was the way that I was judged as a teacher. Not from anything that happened in lesson, because that was when people saw me with my class. So I put all my energy, not consciously, but I put all my energy into those moments where you were, if you like, on show as a teacher. And I think people did sometimes think, well, gosh, he must be a good teacher, because look at the way his class come into assembly. But now I think, so now teachers do have that just intense pressure. And at the end, one of the outcomes of it is great teaching. So look at, for example, the ECT framework. These teachers are learning so much. They've learned so much as they come into teaching, and then they continue this rapid learning experience in the first couple of years. So it's great from that point of view, but it's an awful lot of pressure that young teachers are under, and I think that sometimes that all contributes to the fact that so many teachers, just don't last the course, which is such a shame, and not just a shame, actually, it's a disaster in the long term for our education system if we lose these people. I mean, but it was very different.
Do you think, really, looking back, because you started in 1988, and you said that no one come in to observe you till 95, and that was Ofsted, and then presumably it probably took another decade for it to really work up to where we sort of got to in the early 2000s with like loads of one-off lesson observations.
At which point I was on the other side, Tom, so I was doing the lesson observations. So it's kind of so I sort of had the best of both worlds in a way. But,
so do you think that, I mean, genuinely though, do you think like that teachers were better off for being observed more? I mean, do you think the profession was better for that?
I don't think it's the observation that makes the difference. I think teaching is definitely better now and has gradually got better, but I don't think it's because of observation particularly. I think it's because of the CPD. I think that we had the sea change for me was the national strategies, not necessarily because of what happened when they were introduced in the sort of early 2000s, or about 2005, 6, wasn't it? Then they were introduced. It was more the fact that suddenly there was this expectation that teachers had professional development, and they learned something about the theory of what they were doing, and they were able to kind of have an understanding of why they did certain things and why something would work and something wouldn't work. So I think the thing that's changed is not observation. It's the professional development of teachers and understanding that teachers, that professionalism that teachers have to make decisions. So that, because that really, we didn't have any professional development when I started teaching. The national curriculum came in. We had all these folders that we'd work through at staff meetings, but no one ever really taught you about the mechanics of teaching. And now I think now teachers know. They know all these things. I mean, they understand what makes a good lesson. They understand, they can critically engage with Rosenshine's principles and all sorts of all sorts of different theories and standpoints on education. But that wasn't the case before. But it's not observation that's just not lesson observations that have changed that.
No. Just a good little segue for me to mention the sponsors on the show today. So we've got pinned to the space for those people who are listening live. You've got the Witherslack Group, who have put together a pack to support any family during this period. You've got an access to a huge library of resources on a massive array of topics, and you can access it by clicking the link in the pinned tweets at the top of the space. We've also got a new book that is arriving from Craig Barton, that is at Mr. Barton Maths, called Tips for Teaching, 400 plus ideas to improve your teaching. It's coming soon. I think you can get a pre-order on that in now through John Catt. If you just go to John Catt, the website, and if you type in the search bar Tips for Teachers by Craig Barton, you'll find the book. You can put pre-order in on it. We're really excited. I know Craig is going to be coming on to a Teachers Talk radio show in the new year to talk about his book, which is going to be, it's packed with all the interviews he's been carrying out with
various different people over the last 12 to 18 months. So that's an exciting one to look out for. And the final thing to mention is we are recruiting. If you think you want to be a Teachers Talk Radio host, then please DM us at TT Radio 2022, this Twitter account. DM us on there and say, listen, I want to be a host. And if you do, we will get in touch with you with a nice little info pack about what you can expect from Teachers Talk Radio hosting. So I think our last one we were talking about there was observations. And I agree with you, more observations doesn't necessarily mean better teacher quality. It might mean, if they're done in a certain way where you're getting really quality feedback and it's in a non-judgmental way and, it's sort of part of a school culture, then I feel like that can be positive. And it depends who is doing the observations, of course. I mean, I'll be honest, I don't think I have, in any sort of semi-formal or formal lesson observation I've had, I don't think I've ever been completely myself. I don't think I've been 100%. Maybe I've got to 90%. Maybe I've got to 80%. I've never got to 100% myself in an observed lesson, whether it's formal, semi-formal, even informal. As soon as there is another adult in the room, and I take like a TA out of that, because the TA is not there to observe your practice. A TA is not there to give, to sort of give you feedback. I mean, they might do if you're lucky, but they're not, that isn't their primary role in there. Whereas if a colleague is in there and that the reason they are there is to watch what you're doing, I wouldn't care whether it was classed as formal, informal, a visit, a learning walk, an observation, whatever the title was. If someone was there to watch what I was doing, I was not going to be 100% myself. I wouldn't crack the joke that I was going to crack. And therefore, maybe by cracking that joke, it would have broken the ice in the lesson and it would have been a better lesson, but I wouldn't have done it.
Yeah, and I think we have to just recognize, I mean, I've done, I don't know how many thousands of observations, I guess, or lesson visits or whatever you want to call them. And I think there's value in them. I mean, I certainly learn a lot. I don't think you can go into a lesson and not learn something, or visit a school and not learn something. So it gets, and it just, as what I think the skill of an observer is to be able to see past the kind of immediate, what am I seeing right in front of me, and to kind of think, okay, what's this telling me about the bigger picture, and how this helps us move forward, how I can either start a conversation about the way that someone's working. And also, I think most lessons, let's be honest, I mean, you've kind of hinted it, most lesson observations will have a positive outcome because that's the nature of it, because most teachers or teachers most of the time. So one of the most important things is about affirming the teachers to kind of just to say you're on the right track. We can see what you're doing. You're doing a good job with these pupils. Here's something that that you might want to think about. But on the whole, this is just confirming what we already know, that you're doing a good job. And I think that in some ways people need to know that. And of course, my generation, we didn't have that. So we didn't have any of that. But I think now that's part of it. And also, I think opening up classrooms is a good idea. Open doors, understand it, and not overreact to the fact that people come in and out of lessons, as long as not disturbing the lesson, obviously, I think is a good thing. Now, that's why grading observations can be a barrier, can't it? Because people will just focus on what's this grade going to be, whereas actually lesson visits, sharing practice, opening up conversations, there's some real value in that in terms of the culture of the school, but you have to take the heat out of it. Because as you say, I mean, what you said, you're never completely yourself. Well, the more stress, the more is put on that lesson, the less likely you are to be the teacher that that you would normally be, and that's likely to make the lesson less effective. Maybe not very, much less effective, but slightly less effective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, listen, I mean, don't get me wrong. I think without that culture of consistent observation, I wouldn't have developed as a teacher maybe as quick as I did, because I was being observed so much. And I do think there is truth in saying, well, if you're observed so much, you sort of do get used to it. But I don't think the judgment side of it helped me. because I do think, just like a kid in a class, that if someone said all you were sometimes doing was waiting for the grade, and somebody spending 10 minutes going through what could be really valuable feedback, and in your head you're going, just tell me the grade, just tell me, I just want to know if I've passed, I just want to know if I've got out of this cycle of performance management with what I want. And that is the element that was not helpful. But I think overall and on the whole, I did need and want to be observed, particularly during my PGCE. I think as time went on, obviously it becomes maybe less and less vital, if you like, to what you're doing.
Well, with experience, whether you've done a good lesson, and whether the kids are working. At the start of your career, you generally often don't know that. You need that affirmation, don't you? You need someone who's seen lots of lessons to say, yeah, that's okay. You're on the right lines. But eventually, you don't need an observer to tell you whether you've done a good lesson.
Exactly. I think another thing that I did a lot early in my career, which I would have told myself to stop doing, was compare myself to others. And thinking to myself, oh, because that person did well in a lesson observation, they must be better than me. Or not even that, just a constant feeling like I was always catching up with the Joneses. I was always trying to stay on top of the game. And actually, it was just a false dichotomy of it was just, the whole thing was just like this weird mentality that I'd sort of adopted. Which, but I mean, partly that was like the teaching culture at the time. You know what I mean? Everyone's in competition with each other. Results, lesson observations, rep with the kids, everything. It's like, oh, let's throw it all into one.
Yeah, and you have those mysterious teachers who you don't know how they do it, but they do it. The teachers who just seem to kind of have effortless. Their classes have classes eaten out of their hand. They kind of, they have this fantastic atmosphere, and it's really hard. And I've spent most of my career in leadership, often watching teachers and thinking, I wish that in the, in my years as a class teacher, I'd ever done a lesson as good as the ones that you do every day. So it's it's hard to just kind of to take that and to apply it to your own class and your own circumstance, because that's about the culture and the atmosphere and the relationships that they've built up, and the experience that they have. And so it's not just a question of saying, have a look at them, copy what they do, and then you'll have the same sort of lessons. There's a kind of an alchemy to that that's really hard to put your finger on. What you can do is, by watching brilliant people like that, you reflect on your own teaching and think, so what would I do slightly differently, or how would I manage that interaction, that if that was me. But you can't just think, well, that person, I'm going to do things exactly in that way, because we each bring our own personalities to that, don't we? And you have to be true to your own personality. I think that's a mistake that teachers often make when they're starting to teach. They try and be a different person than the one they actually are, and in the end, you can't sustain that for a whole career.
My number 9 was, every other teacher in the school has been where you are right now and has come out the other side. I'll keep that one in there because it is true. And number 10, which we've sort of already touched on, was make more time for others. Was my 10, to just say, come on, have a chat with that person, stop in the corridor and actually say hello for once, Tom. Instead of just putting your head down and charging towards the next thing, But yeah, I mean, as I said, that it's easy to say that now and look back, and say, "Oh, be less busy," But if you think something is vital to your existence, then it's very hard to say, "Oh no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just sit here and have a chat instead." It's hard to do that. How do you find that as a leader? Because they always say with school leaders and stuff, oh, have a chat with members of staff all the time and get to know them, check in with them, etc., etc. Surely there must be times regularly where you're like, if I do this, then I won't be able to do that.
Yeah, and people, what I often find is that people will say, they'll kind of apologize for taking your time. They can, they'll say, I know you're busy, and and I know that, and if you and almost be grateful for that, which is a nonsense really, because everyone's busy. So it's not that's more important. I think there are ways to have that kind of presence, and I think that it's important that you don't just pass someone in a corridor without at least a kind of a hello or a smile, because it's really easy. I think the more you get into leadership positions, it's really easy to just kind of fall back on that. What I'm doing is really important and I'm really busy, but actually there can be what's important to remember is the impact of what you do is probably the impact in terms of the interaction you have with people is probably greater if you are in a leadership position. I mean, just a quick anecdote: when I was in one of my first headships, and I was doing an observation actually, and I was going into a class, and I knew that we needed to offer one of our TAs more hours. She was part time, knew she wanted to do the extra hours, and we'd managed to get money in the budget. And I was in a class, a reception class, I think it was, observing a lesson, and I hadn't been at the school that long, hadn't been ahead for that long, and I was on my way out, and I saw this lady, and I thought, I said, oh, Jackie, at the end of the day, you can just pop up to the office and I just have a chat with you for 10 minutes. So she said yes, and it went off. The rest of the day went on. She came at the office, and I said, oh, no, we need you to do some extra hours. And she burst into tears, and she said, oh God, I thought I was in trouble. And I just thought, because obviously I'd gone in, I'd observed a lesson, and then unthinkingly, I just said to her, oh, can you come and see me at the end of the day? And she didn't know what I was going to say. So she thought, what had I done wrong? And it just really brought home to me how careful you have to be to the way that you interact with people, because you're in that position of responsibility, and because people can interpret what you say and what you do. So if you're unhappy about something, if you've just come from a meeting that's really gone badly, and you walk past someone in the corridor, and you're still kind of upset or annoyed about that, so you don't you don't kind of acknowledge them, you just kind of walk past, then that you've had another interaction that's gone wrong there, just by not doing anything. You may you're not intending for that to happen, but people will make their own interpretation of that. So I think you do have to be really careful when you're in a position of responsibility. I mean, the same applies teachers to pupils as well, but you have to be really careful about keep investing in those relationships and not having any hierarchy to that, so making sure that you deal with people in those incidental kind of passing in the corridor moments. You deal with people, whether they're your senior teachers or members of your support staff or whoever they are. That's about just passing the human interaction. That's not about the business of your school business. So it's really important, I think, when you're out and about, to be modeling those sort of behaviors and those sort of interactions.
Was that one as well where someone sends an email last thing on a Friday, oh, can I speak to you on Monday?
yeah, exactly. And
same thing.
Yeah.
But it's, what you said's spot on. I mean, when you're in an environment that you consider to be stressful, or you consider to be of a certain nature, and someone says, oh, can I see you for 5 minutes in my office? Like, your first thing is, what the hell have I done? Like, am I getting
yeah. And so all of those, how you're feeding back to people, how you're talking to, it's really important to understand, not just, communication is not what's sent, it's what's received, isn't it, really? So you have to be very careful about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to ask you now, what are your things that you would tell yourself as a new teacher?
So I think the most important thing, this is what made me think when I saw your kind of question, the thing that is really important is to keep a sense of perspective, and just to understand. I mean, I've had very, very few days that have been all good, and very, very few days that have been all bad, and in 20 and 30 something years, because there's ups and downs in this job, and you can go from one to the other in a very, very short space of time. And it's just been able to have that, to build your resilience, just to stand back and think, actually, this is, things are going well, and to take the joy in it. And this is when, it really makes me feel disheartened when I hear people say or see people write that they're disillusioned with teaching. And I understand it's not criticism. I understand that that's a genuine thing. But I think we work in this environment where you're with children and young people who are joyous, and give so much back. We should all be on the same side. I know it doesn't always happen, but you should be working with colleagues. Should be all together, working for each other, all collaborating towards a shared goal. So overall, this should be it's pressured. It's very intense at times. There's I know that there's all sorts of issues for people in the job about pay and about the opportunities and so on. But overall, that kind of privilege of working in positive, happy places that are shaping the future, it's really easy when you get bogged down to lose sight of that. So I think the main thing I'd say is just when things are tough, take a step back and just find, what's the, where do you find the joy in your job? Just those interactions you have with kids in corridors, the kind of funny things, the funny stories, the moments when, you've had a terrible day or a terrible afternoon, whatever, last period, and you go to the staff room and there's a few people there and you just have you can have a laugh about it and share it, swap a few stories and so on. So it's really easy to get bogged down and to think this is really hard, this is really tough, but just make sure you step back and just think, actually, this is okay. I'm doing a decent job. I'm doing a job that's really important, because I think I see people saying, overwhelmed by kind of work and pressure, especially in the early years of the career. And just to say, but actually, I know it feels like that, but you're doing a good job. It doesn't mean you're not doing well. It doesn't mean you're not having an impact. And those things, over time, hopefully that, you'll learn and you'll get better, or you'll just find it easier to cope with. But I think it's really easy to get into a bit of to go into your shell a little bit and just think everyone seems to be knows what they're doing. Everyone seems to get to understand how to do this job, except me. I don't want to ask anyone because that will put me right in the firing line. So I'm just going to keep my head down and become really disillusioned with it all, because it's a fantastic job and it's a fantastic privilege, but not all the time and not every day, and not every lesson. But those things, that every teacher, no matter how easy they make it look, every teacher has those moments.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say, like, some teachers are experts at making it look like they're floating through like a day. Do you know what I mean? I mean, do those teachers exist? Like, I mean, that are genuinely, like, absolutely, like, just floating through.
Well, I don't know how they can.
On a full timetable.
Yeah, I don't know how they can, because it's hard work. It's really, and the thing about the thing we know about, every teacher knows, every school leader knows, is that the thing that's different, I think, from teaching to lots of other jobs that have different sort of pressures in lots of ways, is that, with teaching, it never ends. When you go home, no teacher who's kind of employed, on a sort of permanent contract at school, no teacher ever gets to the end of their to-do list. It doesn't happen. That will happen when you retire. Whereas I think, you've got very pressure jobs, such as in the health service, but you kind of, at the end of the day, you can't, you're not doing that at home. You can, you're not doing that your day.
Yeah.
So that's not to decry the pressure there. It's just a different sort of pressure. But for teaching, it never ends. You never get to the end of your to-do list. So I don't think anyone can feel that. It's not realistic to feel that we're never under pressure. We never have things to do. And as you know, you have this rhythm in a school year. So, and we don't finish till Wednesday. I know some people have already finished for the term, but anyone who's still going now, everyone is struggling a little bit, because they've been doing this for 15 out of the last 16 weeks, and it's hard work, and they're hanging on for the last couple of days. So even the teachers who find it, most, who go through with the apparently the least effort, will be thinking, how much longer? How am I going to get through these last couple of days? Because that's the nature of the job. and it's that intensity that's, there's always a flip side to this, that it's that kind of that gives us those highs as well as the lows. So I think it's a job of highs and lows.
Yeah, it's interesting. And you know what? Like, there was some interesting comments, because I put the tweet out, what's the one piece of advice you give to your own self about to embark on your teacher career? Probably one of the most controversial replies, I don't know if you saw this one, was don't bother paying a union £25 a month.
Yeah.
Scaremongering teachers into paying that much money for nothing that you can't get for free, so the head of the unions can pay themselves ridiculous salaries, is the biggest con ever. That one divided opinion. There were some who sort of supported that. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I saw that, and I thought that was kind of curious, especially in the context of the question, because it just seemed anyway. But yeah, I mean, so in my role now, I spend not quite a lot of time, but we do negotiate with unions. We kind of have a termly meeting with the unions, and we look at so we just go through some of the policies that we've got. I think it's if people think that joining a union is just is a kind of insurance, then I think they're kind of missing the point. And what unions do is there's a delicate balance between all the different forces. You've got government, public opinion, I don't know, all the different roles, and then the unions, and these things hold a balance, which means that in the end we get the context and the policies that come out of that. So if we didn't have that balance, and in theory I could be on the other side of this, but if we didn't have the unions there making those arguments and holding policymakers to account, then I think we'd end up with a very different situation, which might not be what we wanted. So it's not just about when you need it, because if you're under disciplinary, you need someone to come and argue your case, or if you got redundancy, you need someone to be making your argument or anything like that. It's more about this is accountable. This is an important part of the voice for teachers, the voice for the workforce, because they do have a voice. And I think there's clearly a bit of people are. It's an emotive subject, unions at the moment, in terms of and I think that's where some of those tweets came from. But I saw those and I thought that's a kind of curious thing, really, because I'm not convinced. In fact, let me put it a different way. I'm convinced that if the unions didn't exist, then teachers would be in a worse position. Yeah, I mean,
someone did comment about statutory sick pay and pensions, teachers' pension, all these other things wouldn't exist, or certainly wouldn't exist in their current form, without the collective bargaining of unions, teacher unions, which is probably true. I mean, I don't know for a fact the ins and outs, but I would guess that would be true.
Yeah, well, I think in COVID, I think the unions then they were. I mean, they took a stance, and this is how politics works, isn't it? Under the small p, they took a stance. The government, and there was a certain amount of public opinion that wanted to do things in a certain way, and so we ended up with a compromise. You always do, but if it wasn't for the union saying, "Okay, we want our members protected," then I think we would have ended up with a different outcome in terms of from teachers. So. They form an important part of that balance. I mean,
I do sort of get the line of, I guess, the amount of money that it can sometimes cost to go into a union. For a new teacher, maybe not as much now, but like when I started teaching, like I was on a salary of 19k, and like for me back then, like the union fees were quite a lot, like. It was quite a lot to pay. When have I ever used one? I'm just trying to think now. I mean, I did. I have probably maybe once or twice, not in a particularly sort of serious level, but in my whole career, I've probably only used them a few times, and that wasn't necessarily a one where I really, really had to have them. It was more for advice, support, guidance, and that's all. So. But that's not an argument to say that we don't need unions. Do you know what I mean? That's just one of, I guess, the things where someone would look at it and go, "Oh, do you know what? I'm paying this." But the thing is, as well, is some people pay into like legal schemes rather than unions, which don't have the political arm with them. my personal view on that is that's not good either. But everyone's got their own views, and I sort of understand the arguments on all sides. But anyway, that was an interesting comment. But we got loads of comments. Let's see what else people said. So we've got another one here that says, "Don't do it." So that got 25 likes. We've got this one was an interesting one from John B. John B said, and I've done this. Go international teaching as soon as you can. Don't waste years struggling in the UK. I get that. I mean, I did that, albeit after 8 years. And I remember, like, after 2 years, so this would have been going back now to like 2010, when international teaching wasn't really half as fashionable as it is now. Like, I was thinking of doing it, and I didn't in the end. And sort of there is a part of me that thinks, oh, how would it have turned out if I'd done that? You know? I probably wouldn't have got the experience that I got. But equally, I don't know, like, where would that path have gone? But it is difficult to settle internationally, though. It is difficult. You know, you can often feel like you're living out of a suitcase. That was my experience in the 2 countries I lived in and worked in. And that's nothing to do with the countries. The countries were great. It was more, I think it's just harder than you think to actually settle down somewhere outside of your sort of home. It's possible, but it's not as easy as you think. What else have we got here? English teacher says, there are 3 things about teaching that you just have to accept. 1, it's never all done. 2, there's always 1. 3, it's not personal. I like that. That's a good one.
That's some wisdom there, isn't there? So
that's not bad, is it? We can rate these. Would you win that or bin it?
Oh, definitely win that.
It's good. Next one, Mr. Barnes Science says, just be yourself and don't be afraid to just do what's best for the students in front of you. Remember, it's just a job, not a vocation. Is it just a job?
No, I don't think it is just a job. I disagree with it. I mean, I agree with the first part, what you said, and I don't think the vocation side of it, I don't think it means that therefore we can demand more, and and you just have to put up with it. But I think that it's more than a job. I think, and almost every teacher I see, you don't have to talk to them very long to know that
signal or your signal.
Oh, I can still hear you. Can you hear me, Tom? Is that okay?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah. Oh, can you hear me now?
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if. Can you still hear me?
I can still hear you. Yes.
Oh, that's good. It was just the signal went all garbled then, but I don't know if it was just me on my end.
Oh, right. Okay.
Nathan, if you're listening, do tell. But so I think.
Hi, Tom. I can hear both of you equally.
Oh, that's good. That's good news. Excellent.
So I don't
excellent.
know if that helps at all.
Oh, it does.
It does. Equally.
It does. That's glorious. So that was one. We also have another one here. It says, it's about planning. Never cut corners on planning, even if it takes you 5 minutes.
Yeah, well, I can see the sense in that.
Oh, you're back.
Yeah, I can see the sense in that, Tom. That the idea of planning being important, but first of all, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do all the planning from scratch. I think that's the important thing about that. I think going in and winging it is not a good strategy to do more than once in a blue moon. But being able to, the planning doesn't have to be done from scratch. You don't have to spend, half of every weekend, planning every lesson to the nth degree. So I think what's been really positive.
I'm going to rejoin
few
and see
years.
What happens.
Okay. So I'll keep on talking. So just around planning, I think that as long as you've got, the lesson is planned, it doesn't matter whether that's a collaborative effort, whether you've used some resources and you've adapted them to the class that you're in. I think it's important that that we look at planning, and that's that you say to teachers, don't try and just wing it, don't try and busk it.
Yeah.
Are you back with us,
I
Tom?
hope so.
Right.
We'll give it a go. I don't know. We're gonna finish soon anyway. We nearly got there without a tech dump.
Yeah.
So Emma says, don't take things too personally. give your best to everything you do, but recognize that you'll make mistakes. Learn from those mistakes, but don't let them define you as a teacher. Do everything with integrity and authenticity. I like that. It's good, that, isn't it?
Yeah, great advice, Emma. Yeah, and people will recognise that. I think your colleagues, the pupils, the others in the community will recognise that you're doing things. You're trying to do things as best you can. You're doing things with integrity, and authenticity is a great word as well.
It is a good word. It is a good word. There's one here from Hannah who is actually listening. This is Hannah Wilson's tweet. Only do it if the students benefit. Oh, you're saying that to a school leader, Hannah.
Yeah. Well, it's a good challenge, Hannah, and I think it's a good challenge. And I think I know the sort of things that you're referring to, and I think so. I think it's a reasonable question to say, how are the students benefiting from it? Of course, that might not be directly. Some of that might be indirect. That it might not be immediately in that lesson, or in that week, but it could be that that's contributing to something, I don't know, that allows longer term some things to happen. But I think school leaders have to be open to those challenges, and kind of and I think hopefully, I know it does sometimes happen because I see people complain about it, but hopefully people don't say we've got to do this because of Ofsted, we've got to do this because of the trust, or we've got to do this, or for whatever reason, because the SLT have told us that we have to do this now.
And that's that sort of thing without any. That's what was frustrating, is like when you hear something like that, and then there's no but we're going to do this because it's the right. It's like Dave said we need to do it. That's it. No discussion. End of discussion. We're doing it because they said we're going to do it. Yeah, but what if it doesn't matter? We're doing it. And it's sort of like, hang on a minute. Like we're all humans here. We've all got critical thinking. Like let's at least have some sort of joined up thinking about this. Hey, this is a good one. Listen to this one from Barry Smith. If you're independent minded, skeptical of received wisdom, you're going to get very frustrated very often. But if you just ignore good practice, in inverted commas, you could do some amazing stuff. So be a maverick if it's in you. And then he's written something in French that I don't understand. That has gallop at the end. I do like that. Like, I do agree on the whole with that. Like, there is that element of, here's a straight, not in every school and not in every situation, but there can be that here's a straight jacket, and we need you to fit into it. Here's a list of sort of non-negotiables or things that every teacher has to do, and everything should look this way. And I can think of places where only the corporate will do. Only the sort of regimented, you've got to wear a certain suit, you've got to look a certain way, you've got to talk a certain way, you've got to structure your lesson a certain way, you've got to do and say these things in every lesson or it's not a good lesson. You've got to do X, and we could go on for an hour with those things. So I do think that those sort of cultures exist, and some of that culture is within the education system itself. So I do I do buy into that, although I don't necessarily buy into that. If we were to put the phrase standalone, if you just ignore good practice, well, there are certain things that are fundamentally good. Like there are certain things that are fundamentally good. So
I think the way that I look at this, and lots of different levels, is that there's a difference between autonomy isn't always desirable. So autonomy, whether that's on a school level or an individual teacher level or a department level, isn't always desirable. Because then that's where you're going to get inconsistency. You're going to have maybe people not learning from, not being able to learn from each other's practice and so on. But what you do need is agency. So I think it's not a question of saying everyone can do whatever they want, and just teach in whatever way you want. But everyone should have an input into the way that they do things. So if someone doesn't have if you don't have any agency, then I think you're deprofessionalizing, and you're just having that thing. And I've seen it. I've been in schools where, every lesson has to, is do now, then there's recall quiz. Then and every lesson is is identical subject to subject, which I think is too much. But that kind of agency, I think, is really important.
I don't think there's anything wrong in itself with that idea of the do now task, the retrieval quiz, and all that. I don't think there's anything wrong. They're good things. It's just when you sort of dictate and check and judge every single teacher against a set of non-negotiables, whatever those non-negotiables are, even if all the non-negotiables are like good things or sort of could be good things. That what I'm saying is, does that culture then generate that element of sugar? Am I going to get caught out because I haven't done this non-negotiable, even if that non-negotiable is a good thing? I don't want to get caught out.
We used to have that in lesson observations, and I know, maybe what time we're thinking, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, where you would go into a lesson observation, and as a school, I'm kind of slightly cringing as I'm saying this because I was part of this. As a school, you'd tick off, lesson objective on the board, tick, differentiation 3 levels, tick, 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 and you'd kind of go through all of this, whatever the kind of, plenary, use of whiteboards, whatever it might be, and you'd almost tick as if it was a sort of recipe, and as long as you had these ingredients, then you had a good lesson. And I think that's that sort of reductionist way of looking at lessons and looking at teaching. Hopefully we understand that that's we've moved on from that.
I think on the whole we've moved on from that now. I think the profession has moved on from that now, to an extent, but I do think there's still some of it knocking around, for different reasons. Even if it's like, you think about it, it's also like it might move on to curriculum, things around the curriculum that are sort of, curriculum non-negotiables. You know what I mean? Like, the sort of new lists and new things that people need to include in this, that, and the other, and must include and all that. So it's an interesting one. What else have we got here? We've got we've not got long left now, about 10 minutes. Someone's put here, this is Craig Burrows, and I like this. Craig Burrows said, chill out a bit more. That's it. It's key to everything for me. Sometimes I realise it a bit too late. I think Craig was possibly high at the time he tweeted that. That was a joke. He probably wasn't. But he seems a very chilled out guy when you look at his profile picture. But he just said, chill out a bit more.
Yeah. Well, I think for lots of people starting teaching, that's not bad advice, because it doesn't, you see people, struggling home with bags full of books and kind of, and coming back. What did you do at the weekend? Oh, I didn't. I just did my planet, and I think actually, just try and keep it in perspective the whole time. It's easy to say, not so easy to do.
By the way, if anyone wants to call in now for the last 10 minutes, just hit the little request icon in the bottom left. Thanks everyone who's listened for the entirety of this show from 7:30 to now. Oh my goodness, you're hardcore, especially at this time of year. So thank you very much for doing that. Another comment from Graham Ritchie says, who's a science teacher, when this is I don't know whether to laugh or cry at this. When a year 9 boy asks if he can go to the toilet 3 minutes before the end of class, for goodness sake, let him go.
Something's happened. There's a story behind that, Tom.
Thank you to yourself. Well, we want to know the story behind that. We can't invite Graham in now to explain what happened, but I'm guessing it didn't end well.
No.
Oh dear. We've got one from Davo. Another one who said, don't do it. Davo said, don't do it. There's loads more rewarding and less stressful jobs out there. I wasted 30 years being criticised before I saw the light. Now in training for a large company, and I love it. As in, he is a trainer for a large company. There's nothing to do with education. There was quite a lot of those, on this thread, who sort of said, not don't do it, but said, like, there's a less stressful path to follow, if you like. We've got this one. Let's have a look what we've got here. Oh, yes, this isn't bad. Ellie says, kindness and understanding for every student. It costs nothing and might just be the difference that they needed that day.
Yeah, I think, that's I think that's, I 100% agree with that. I mean, of course, that, what does kindness understanding look like? It may not, it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean you have low expectations. It doesn't mean that you kind of accept things that you shouldn't do, but in the end, that's what it's all about. That's what we're there for. So I think that's a really good, and being able to kind of have that filter to say, right, I want the best for you, and so that's why I'm going to do this. But that's what proper kindness is, isn't it, in terms of teaching?
Or it might just be it doesn't have to be sort of like you just say. It doesn't have to be about lowering expectations or like going, oh, I'll let you off that or whatever. It can be like a bit of it can be within a lesson, just sort of understanding that a student might not be in the best of spirits or moods, and maybe having a joke, in the lesson, making that student laugh, or that's showing kindness in that particular moment. Maybe we have a bit of a narrow definition sometimes of what showing kindness and understanding is for every student. Sticking to the boundaries can be showing kindness and understanding for that student. Having those really clear boundaries that are stuck to, that can be showing kindness and understanding in certain contexts.
And I think just being able to, so if you're at the front of the class, you can see noticing that you've got someone there who's looking, you ask them a question and you see the look of sheer panic that comes into your face, and just know, okay, I'm going to move on. I'll come back to that, and just to kind of understand read those situations, because that pupil will know what's happened there and will appreciate that.
Definitely. We've got Bronwyn, who says the profession needs you. Your best is enough.
And I think that's right. So when we talk about this, people say don't do it. And I mean, I think there's something about teaching that when you get the chance to step back. So it might be, people might be doing it this week or on Thursday, when you get to the end of a term, and you just think, if someone says to you, what do you do for a living? I think most of us are proud to say that we're in teaching. It's something that you think, this is a good thing. This is something that that adds value and, changes lives, and all of those kind of cliched things, but that are all absolutely true. And as I say, you might not be feeling that every day, but when you get the chance to step back thinking, actually, I'm doing something good here. And that's something we get. I mean, I don't know if you've had this experience, Tom, but when when you're with a group of people, some, maybe a couple of whom are teachers and the others aren't, I think people are really interested in what in our work and what we do, and it's kind of and want to hear the stories and want to kind of know about that, because it is something that everyone recognizes. This makes a difference. This is important.
This is a good one from Wendy. Wendy has tweeted saying, "Go and be a stunt woman." That's what she would have told her NQT ECT self. Okay, Wendy, thanks for letting us know. Great.
I can think of a few schools that Wendy could have worked in, actually. Those skills might have been handy.
Very specific, isn't it? Something that she wished she'd have done.
Yeah.
What else have we got here? Karen Dobson tweeted saying, "I'll pass on the advice I was given when I first started. If there are corners you can cut them. Also, this has always been hilariously true. Beware of wind, snow, and injections."
Yes, yeah. And if any two of those arrive at the same time, then you're really struggling. So
this is a good one from Dame Squarepeg. Dame Squarepeg tweeted saying, "Always pay into your pension. One day you'll retire and get free money every month until you die for doing nothing if you choose." Yeah,
and I mean that's very good advice. It sounds like sounds like someone who's moving on to the side there to take advantage of that. But I think,
I thought you were going to say thinking about death. Then I was like, don't say
yeah. Most of us don't. Most of us just do that automatically. But actually, it's also worth bearing in mind that is something that is a big part of it's a big part of the attraction of teaching, because the wages in themselves may not be may not stand comparison with doing other things. But actually, having that, the pension is a big bonus for, compared to if you were working for a private company. So, definitely always pay into pension. Great advice.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it? We've got 3 minutes left. How many more of these do you think we can pack in? Do not. Charlie says, do not do your PGCE in an art subject, as you will still be without a job over a decade later.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's changing, Charlie. I'll tell you,
I
I think
agree.
there won't be many teachers who are out of a job in the next couple of years, because you know, I think that's one of the biggest problems facing our profession is, you know, is, I suppose, as we're talking about now, that we're not having enough people joining. But
Are you
yeah,
finding it super tough on recruitment at the minute?
just starting to. So we've not had, you know, we've not had a lot of movement, but we're just starting to see that, you know, the numbers aren't coming through in quite the same way. You know, we're in Nottingham, so we're near a couple of very big
Yeah,
teacher training institutions, and that's helpful. And we've got good relations with them. But yeah, we're really seeing it actually in support staff is the big, and then some of those roles that don't pay so much because, you know, because there's more options out there. But I think,
yeah.
yeah, it's teachers will be needed, and anyone doing a PGC or an ITT now is not going to find it difficult to get a job in the next few years.
In any subject?
Well, primary is always the one where we get the most applicants, I think, for an individual job, and then you occasionally get, but even things like languages, we've been okay. I've sometimes, you know, visited some schools out in Lincolnshire, in the sort of, you know, the wilds of Lincolnshire, and they're really struggling for science, for example. They just cannot get science teachers in, you know, where you're away from the sort of cities and so on, and in that kind of rural coastal environment. And I think it's a real problem. You know, there's because kids in schools I've been to don't have access to qualified science teachers, and they're doing GCSEs. So it's and there's literally nothing the school can do about that.
You know what
So,
I would say? You know what I would say to me if I was starting now? I'd say you are really valuable as an asset. Like, do not underestimate. Like, not that you could have the pick of jobs, but yeah, you sort of could. You know what I mean? Like, if you're half decent at what you're doing, then you really can pick and choose probably much more than in 2007 when I started out. You know.
yeah, and have a really varied career. You know, you can do lots of different things within teaching.
I mean, do you think, because someone did actually say about moving on, do you think that teachers, do you think there's like a cut-off date where a teacher should move on from a school? Or do you just not think that rule should exist?
Not necessarily, but I think I think if you want kind of promotions, then I think it's useful to see more than one, at least more than one environment. So, and just to learn from it, I think, and learn from people and work with different leadership teams and so on. So I think for those are reasons. But I've also known teachers who've been, you know, 35 years in the same school and are beloved in that school and do an amazing job, you know, and you know, they're teaching their children and almost their grandchildren of former students and contribute so much to that community in a different sort of way. But I think if you're career minded, it's a useful thing to see different schools.
Do you know what, this comment, like this tweet I've got here in front of me, like, it's a bit like, I actually agree with it, but I've never sort of thought about it till I read it. But it says, "Are you solid enough?" ? Because the animosity in the classroom can be very overwhelming. Teenagers aren't easy. I do sort of like, yeah, I know where that person's sort of coming from with that. Like, you've got to be able to depersonalize. If you can't depersonalize, you're in trouble, because if you can't see it in sort of like in more of like a job sense, like, you're there to do a job and it's not personal, and anything they say to you isn't a reaction against you as a person, but it's a reaction against what you're trying to do. You know what I mean?
It tells you more about them and that, you know, the students at that time and what they're going through. And so, you know, I think it's rarely meant personally, I think, and you know, and I think that but when you're first there, especially when you're starting, and every young teacher new to the profession wants to be popular with the pupils, don't they? That's such a natural thing to do, and that over time, it's not that you don't want to be popular anymore. You just realise that you don't get popular by trying to be popular.
Yes,
you just do your job and do it well, and then those things those things come, and you won't, and not every student will like you.
Yeah.
And, but that's just, that's about them, not about you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, we've run out of time. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've
likewise,
really,
Tom.
really enjoyed tonight's chat. It's been fantastic. Anyone who has stuck with us for the duration of this, thank you very much. I can see you all there. Thank you.
Yeah, well done.
It's been wonderful. Just a quick shout as well. Before we go, we've got our sponsors to the show at the very top. You can see them. You've got With the Slack Group, thanks to them. John Catt, thanks to them. And of course, we are recruiting. So if you want to be a host on Teachers Talk Radio, get in touch with us, and we will go from there. You can listen back to this if you join late and you fancy listening back to it. You just click on the same link and it will be available as a recording, although don't listen to the first minute, because that was me going, what the hell is going on? Because Twitter have added some weird theme music thing to the start of Spaces. And I was like, where am I? What's going on? And then I sort of muted myself, and then Nathan had to sort of counsel me through the first few minutes. So don't listen back to that. But after the first 2 minutes, it's all right. It's decent. So yeah, thanks everyone. And I'll be back now after Christmas. Date would be let's have a look, the 16th of January. I'll be back for this one, but actually you have a show starting now on ttradio.org. Sarah's on, so just click listen live on there and listen to her. Go on, give it a go. See you all later. Good night. Thank you very much, Paul. Goodbye.
Thanks, Tom.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.